let me tell you, I used to think something was really wrong with me. I was so anxious. I felt everything deeply, and I just lived in a state not only of anxiety, but always overthinking. I'd have a conversation and I'd say, did I say this right? Did I do this right? And not to mention, I just couldn't go as fast and as hard as other people. And then I found out that I'm a highly sensitive person. And knowing that I'm a highly sensitive person has totally changed not only how I lead my life, but what I need to do to make sure that I stay healthy. First of all, if you've never heard of a highly sensitive person, we are called HSPs. That's where the highly sensitive person comes in. And basically is that our nervous system is very sensitive to different stimuli, to our environments. It's almost like we can feel everything. When I say everything, for example, say there are noises. Now I'll be with someone and it'll be a loud noise and it could be a pop and they'll just keep right on walking. With me, it's not even a loud noise. It could be just something almost not subtle, but definitely if it just comes out of nowhere, I almost jump. I do. It's sometimes loud noises will make me jump. A lot of bright lights, just anything with a lot of stimulation is very hard for me. And then a lot of things, if somebody comes toward me, even if it's someone who is already in my environment, even if it's someone I know, but if they're kind of coming from the side or from the back, it makes me, I just have a reaction. I sort of wince about it because it's sort of, they're coming into my space. And that's what I mean by environment. Now, the reason why I think it's important to talk about why highly sensitive people are so special is because I've read we're only about 25 to 30% of the population, which means there aren't a lot of us out there, but we feel that no one understands what we're going through. And when I talk about sort of being caught off guard and what it's like, how sometimes we don't feel really steady, I think, and I remember, for example, I was walking one time and I saw this person beside me and it was kind of like this shadow, this dark shadow or something like that, but it was walking with me. And I said, who's that? Honey girl, I turned around and the shadow was me. That's what I mean when they say people, you'll jump at your own shadow. That might be extreme for a lot of people, but that's what happened to me. And that's when I say is that sometimes we can be so sensitive. And we're also very sensitive, for example, when we walk into a room, in an environment. And this is what I've learned. I can be talking to someone, I can be working with someone, there can be people, and a lot of people are holding their emotions in because we feel others' emotions. That's another thing that's a trait of a HSP. We can feel what people sometimes are really thinking, even when they are not saying it. So I've worked with people and they seem confident, but I can tell that a lot of things are about to hit the fan. Like I can tell and feel a lot of their stress. Well, I absorb that stress and I sort of feel it's sort of like they are spraying their emotions all around, just spraying it all around the room. They don't sense that. And so the thing about it is what that person is not dealing with, I feel is now being projected on me. They're not dealing with their issues or their emotions, but I can tell something is going on. And what does that cause me? Oh, it can cause me, like I said, anxiety. It can cause me stress. And then it can cause me to wonder, make me think, am I the one who's going crazy? No, they're the one who's dealing with it, but they're not facing their issues. So as a highly sensitive person, I take on that person's issues because HSPs, we are empaths. So One thing that I learned, and this was really helpful as I grew older, because when I was older, I didn't understand why I went through some of the things that I went through when I was young. And I do, and I've heard that a lot of HSPs, that especially in childhood, we go through a lot of bullying. What we don't understand is that, and this can go for any bully, they're just projecting their stuff on you. But there was a lot of things those kids were going through. And I was not only picking up that, but I was very, very sensitive to it. Because as an HSP, you just can't blow off things. If you have a conversation with someone and something feels off, or you're trying to communicate or relay what you're feeling, a lot of times you will play it over and over and over again, because we overprocess. Our neurons will overprocess information. I can have a conversation and somebody else, and sometimes it's not even a big deal, but someone can walk away from that conversation and go, oh, well, I'll play it over and over and over again. I should have said this. I didn't tell them this. It can go on. It used to go on for days. And I think that's a reason why, especially with HSPs, sometimes we have to really be careful of the projects, of the jobs, or of the task that we take on, because we can't just sometimes leave something at the door. If we're doing something and then something goes down, especially goes wrong, because HSPs can have a lot of self-blame. Sometimes we can feel a lot of guilt. A lot of HSPs are people pleasers. I'm not saying that I'm like that now, but I always felt, why didn't I say this? I could have done this. So even though, say, it's a new day, it's a new hour, others are moving on, we're still processing that conversation and that incident and that event in our minds, which means it slows us down, which also means it's hard to move on to something else. So everything gets bogged down. Everything gets dragged out. And that's been one of the hardest things, is sometimes feeling that I'm going slower than other people, that I'm not grasping things as hard as other people, as fast as other people, as quickly, because this is a culture that values toughness. It values pushing forward. It values confidence, just go, go, go. It values productivity, sometimes extreme productivity, how fast that you can get things done. Well, as HSPs, if you have all this stimulation coming up, if you're thinking about what this conversation is with this person, and it's overloading your brain, oh my gosh, that's why sometimes we feel as HSPs that we're not as productive as others. I mentioned the fact that we have a lot of stimulation, especially in social situations. Social situations can present a big threat to us as HSPs, because we walk in the room, as I said, and we're feeling everything. And then sometimes having conversations with a lot of people, being in big groups, it's been sometimes very intimidating for HSPs and for me especially. Now, there is a difference between being an HSP and being an introvert, because just because you are an HSP doesn't mean, or just because you're an introvert doesn't mean that you're a HSP, because it feels like they would be one of the same. It's like, okay, if I'm an introvert, I'm an HSP, but not necessarily. Introverts might draw their strengths from quiet time and being alone, but that doesn't mean that, working 10 or 12 hours on a project, or being detail oriented, or doing something that's all consuming, or being around something in their own environment they love that's highly stimulating, that doesn't mean necessarily they're going to burn out. HSPs have to be very, very aware of a lot of things. For example, we can be by ourselves, but we can also be doing something for hours at a time, or listening to, have a lot of stimulation noise in that environment, and it will burn us out. That's why recovery time is so important for HSPs. It is so important because that's what I've learned that has helped save me, is doing things possibly for an hour or 2 hours and then taking a break from it. Because as I said, you might be getting overloaded with a lot of information. If you have a lot of information coming at you, ooh, because we overprocess, our minds can get overstimulated. It almost means that you can sort of feel like you're losing your way, sort of that, oh my gosh, I can't keep up with this amount of information. At least that's been my process, is that sometimes I feel like, oh, this is a lot. And I have to take my time and process it. So those are the things that might feel like, oh my gosh, those are aspects that are negative about HSPs. But let me tell you what the positive is related to HSPs. First of all, we're usually really creative. And you might not think, if you are a highly sensitive person, you might think, I'm not that creative. But sometimes you can really feel the depth with regard to music. You can feel the different layers. You can hear things, subtle things and undertones that people are feeling and they're expressing in their music. With art, you can see a piece of artwork and you can really understand it on a deeper level than a lot of people can. And then listening. Oh my gosh, listening. We are really good listeners. We can pick up on the subtleties of what someone is trying to express. And I feel that a lot of HSPs, because sometimes we've had to be a little bit more mature because of some of the things that we've gone through when we were little, we just really just can sit there with a person. Now, there is a problem sometimes with that because we're good listeners, but also I know I've had problems where sometimes I'm listening, but I'm also thinking a lot, because you're thinking about something that happened this morning. You're thinking about the future. Sometimes HSPs, I think we really have problems being here in the moment, in the now, because there's a lot going on in our brains. But when I think about the qualities that people have told me that they really love about me, they love that I'm a good listener, and I just reserve time for them. That's one of the best parts, is that when we're with someone, especially one-on-one, I think we're really, really locked in. So another thing about HSPs, at least for me, is that it's gotten easier as I've grown older. Now, it could be that I've accepted things, but I don't think my mind has been just so overstimulated so much. It used to be so bad that I used to lose everything. We always talk about people lose their keys, but I used to lose so much because I couldn't just think of a hold of one thing. And as I got older, I realized that I was much more centered. And that's the thing, is as you get older, you just become a little bit more centered, a little bit more comfortable in your skin. Some things don't bother you as much, the things that you also learn to kind of cut people out of your life if they're stressing you out, because you can't take it as much. So what are the things I think that can really help HSPs just do better, that can help them feel more peaceful, at peace? Because you really have to think about peace and comfort within your body and within your mind. I think some of the things are things I've just mentioned. Think about things like art, and think about music. Think about things that bring flow into your life, that ground you. Nature is one of the best things that will ground you if you are a HSP. Being around, I love the woods, I love walking, I love trees. thinking things. Also, I love putting my feet in the ground. That's another thing, earthing. If you haven't heard of earthing, look it up. It's really helpful for HSPs, for us to ground ourselves. But movement, things like, for example, and I personally believe slow movement is very helpful for HSPs, because sometimes we're moving faster in our minds. And so things like yoga is really helpful. I've done Pilates, things that kind of help me with my core work. But dance, I loved Zumba, I loved fast dancing, I loved anything that kind of helped me feel a little bit of freedom within my body. So movement is really important. As I mentioned before, recovery time, having that recovery time within yourself. As I said, having a couple of hours doing something and then taking a break. Now, when I'm locked in, I love when I'm locked in and I work hours of time. There are projects that have consumed me. The thing I think we have to understand with HSP, sometimes our energy goes up and down, up and down. So you have this project that you're consumed with, and then it sort of feels like it's a little lower, and that you have to come down for it. So mainly schedule recovery time. And don't feel bad about if you have to have recovery time. Recovery time can feel different for everybody. Recovery time can be you do something for 45 minutes, you do something for an hour, a couple of hours, and then you take a break, whether it's you drink some water, whether you eat something, whether you take 15 minutes, whether you put a podcast on in the background, whether you play music, whether you take a walk. The thing is just to let your mind to realize that you are not a machine, and you don't need to treat yourself like a machine. Something else that I think that is great for HSPs is that just accept yourself. Accept yourself for who you are. We're not like everybody else, and there's a lot of gifts that we bring to the world. The world needs us. It needs us to be at our created self, our quiet selves, you know, the things that we give to people. Like I said, that wisdom and that experience and the things that we are sometimes we are very detail oriented, especially when we've blocked out a lot of things. We make great coaches. We make great business leaders. There's so many things that we do because of the fact that we really can focus, when we are able to do that, on just one thing, on those subtle things in life. As I said, artists, those are good things. And because of our empathic cells, I think there's an aspect that, especially when we tap into our spirituality, that makes us very strong and can really make us thrive in life. But another thing that you might need to do as an HSP is simply walk away. Learn to walk away from a situation. And this is going to be sometimes hard. It gets easier as you get older. But when you have to walk away for something that's not good for you, when you have to walk away from relationships that aren't in your best interest, you might have to make a tough decision. But it will be the best decision, and you'll realize it will make you stronger. So those are the things that can help you as an HSP. But I just think there's a reason why we are the way we are, and just love yourself for who you are.